Hello guys, and welcome to Microbial Odyssey. We'll be looking at the cell, definition of cell, the cell theory and types of cells. The definition of cell, the cell theories and types of cells. So first, we'll look at the definition of a cell. What is a cell? Basically, the cell can be said to be the smallest basic unit of life. That is the smallest structural unit that is responsible for life processes to occur. It is the structural, functional, or biological unit of every living thing. That is, for anything to be classified as being living or to function as a living thing, it means that it must contain a cell. It must be made up of one or more cells. So simply put, you can define cell as the basic fundamental unit of life. Better put, you can say it is the basic structural and functional unit of life. So that is to say that if you bring any organism or any living thing and then pieces it down, the basic unit of existence, the basic functional unit of existence of that particular organism or that living thing is known as cell. That is, cell is the building block. The cell is the building block of every living thing. So the most important aspect or the most important structure of every living thing is known as the cell. All living organisms already known. Well, it's already known that from the previous slide that all living things are composed of cell, because cell is the smallest or the basic functional unit of living things. So it invariably means that all living things are made up of cells. Now, based on the structures of cells or the structure of organisms, the composition of the organism, the cell can be classified as single cell. That is, there are organisms that can exist as a single cell, which are known as unicellular organisms. Unicellular organisms. While there are other organisms that are made up of more than one cells, which are termed multicellular organisms. Example of unicellular organisms, we have the organisms that can exist as single cell. We have the amoeba, the paramecium, the bacteria, and so on. While for the multicellular organisms, we have higher animals like the plants, we even have like man, the goats, and so on. Now, if you look at the picture of the cell present here, you see that it has different parts, parts contained in it. And that brings us to looking at the cell structure. Importantly, in the cell structure comprises of the different parts of the cell. We have the cell cytoplasm, which is the inside of the cell covered or surrounded by the cell membrane. The cytoplasm is the inside of the cell surrounded or covered by the cell membrane. And within this cytoplasm, there are a lot of other different biomolecules like the protein, lipid, nucleic acids that are present in them. However, importantly, we want to talk about the organelles. So if you look at inside the cell also, you observe different organelles that are there, the membrane-bound structures, which are known as the organelles that are suspended within the cell. And we also have the nucleus present. So the cell structure has to do with the different parts of the cell, which importantly we have the cytoplasm and the cell membrane, which makes up the protoplasm, and then we have the nucleus, which contains the nucleic material or the DNA of that particular organism. Let's look at the discovery of the cell and look at some scientists that made important contributions to the discovery of the cell. So many centuries, so many years ago, when the cell was discovered, it made a huge impact. It contributed hugely in the study and changed the study of life science and paved the way for modern biology, which is why a lot of things we can be able to manipulate the cells, we can be able to do a lot of things and have a proper understanding of what we are doing when handling the cell currently. And some of the scientists, a lot of scientists contributed, but let's look at the three major scientists that made the initial contributions. We have Robert Hooke, who is recorded as the first to observe the cell and even coin the term cell in the year 1665. Using his optical microscope, his local optical microscope, he was able to, examine the cork cell, and he observed after looking at it under the microscope that he was seeing little boxes, or what he called small rooms. And based on our current knowledge, we now understand that what he actually saw was a plant cell. Then came Anton van Leeuwenhoek, not quite long, a Dutch scientist who used a more advanced compound microscope than that of Robert Hooke to observe living cells in pond water, stagnant pond water. He observed that these living organisms had a sort of movement, which is why he termed them animalcules, meaning little animals. Now, without his magnifying lens or his microscope, he couldn't see those organisms, but when he placed the microscope or the lens over the pond water, he sees little things that are moving, which he called animalcules, little animals. He was also, accredited with being the first to observe the protozoa, bacteria, and blood cells. Then Robert Brown was actually the person that identified or discovered the nucleus, the distinct structure within the cell, the nucleus. And that was threw more light on the understanding of other double membrane-bound organelles within the cell. Now let's look at the cell theory. The cell theory was initially propounded by two scientists, the botanist Matthias Schneidon and the zoologist Theodor Schwein. Actually, these were two friends working differently in their different fields. The other one worked on animal cells, while the other one worked on plant cells. But one important thing was that both of them observed differently. In fact, a report has it that Matthias Schneidon was the first to actually notice that all plant cells were made up of a basic structure called all plant organisms or all plant structures were made up of a basic structure which was termed cell. And then a year after, Theodor Schwein came up and reported similar thing in the animal kingdom, that all animals are made up of basic structures, functional structures, which they also called them. Independent observations, they came to the conclusion that all living things are made up of cell. Individually, that cell is the basic structural and functional unit of life. And then the contribution of Rudolf Virchow, who later observed that all cells arise from pre-existing cells. These three scientists, Matthias Schneidon, Theodor Schwein, and Rudolf Virchow, with formulating the cell theory. Actually, the cell theory is more than this, but these three are the generally accepted theories for the cell or cell biology. And they are as follows. 1. All living things are composed of cells, or all living things are made up of cells. Then 2. The cell is the basic structural and functional unit of life, and all cells arise from pre-existing cells. Unicellular, as characterized by Rudolf Virchow. And one will begin to wonder why I said that the cell has more than 3 is because these remaining theories are not lost, because more discoveries, more research are currently going on, and as new experimental evidence tend to surface, these theories tend to change. We have 2 basic types of cells based on structural composition. Remember, initially we talked about types of cells based on compositions. We talked about unicellular organisms, and we talked about multicellular organisms. Unicellular are single-celled organisms, while multicellular organisms that are made up of 1 or 2 or more cells. While structurally we have 2 types as well, the prokaryotic cell and the eukaryotic cell. The prokaryotic cell and the eukaryotic cell. So when you look at the structures of these 2 cells, you observe that the prokaryotic cell looks more simpler and easy and with a lot of clarity when compared to the prokaryotic cell, which is more complex with a lot of other structures within it. So I want to just highlight the similarities between these two organisms. You look at both of them have the cytoplasm, which is the inside of the cell, as already noted. The inside of the cell, the cytoplasm. Both of them have the ribosome. The ribosome, which is for protein synthesis, and both of them have the plasma membrane, which is surrounding the cytoplasm, or what you call the cell membrane surrounding the cytoplasm. The cytoplasm is the inside of the cell, while the cell membrane or the plasma membrane is surrounding the cytoplasm, covering the cytoplasm. So this is a simpler cell compared to this. Now, what are prokaryotic cells and what are eukaryotic cells? We are going to really talk about more on the prokaryotic and eukaryotic cell maybe in the subsequent video. We'll also look at the differences, about 6 or 5 differences between prokaryotic and eukaryotic cell. But one major note or one major point to differentiate the prokaryotic and eukaryotic cell is the presence of the nucleus or nuclear membrane, a well-defined nuclear membrane or well-defined nucleus in the eukaryotic organism. The presence of a well-defined nucleus in the eukaryotic organism. While in the prokaryotic organism, there is absence of that. You do not have nucleus, well-defined nucleus there. You can see that this is the nucleoid, or what you can call them as the genetic material. Some reporters report it as the DNA. While if you look at this prokaryotic organism, it has a nucleus, a well-defined nucleus, having the nuclear membrane, the nucleoloids, we have the nuclear pore, and so on and so forth. Different parts of the nucleus well defined. But for the prokaryotic cell, you can't see such thing. It is just within the cytoplasm you have just the nuclear material or the nucleoid, and then other parts of the cell. Then you look at the prokaryotic cell is simple and do not have membrane-bound organelles. But when you take a look at the eukaryotic cell, you see that they have membrane-bound organelles. You can see the Golgi apparatus, the mitochondria, the lysosome, and so on and so forth. So, in definition, prokaryotic cells are cells or are simple cells that lack a nucleus and membrane-bound organelles. They are cells that lack nucleus, a well-defined nucleus, and membrane-bound organelles. While eukaryotic cells are complex cells that have a defined nucleus and other membrane-bound organelles. Thank you for listening, and do not forget to like and subscribe. See you some other